The morning I arrived at the Emperor's Palace, it was raining. Not the soft, forgiving kind of rain that makes Seattle look like a painting. The aggressive kind. The kind that soaks through a jacket in 30 seconds and makes the whole world smell like wet concrete and cold iron. I stood on the sidewalk outside the iron gates of the Yoon estate with one duffel bag, a letter of employment, and the absolute nerve of someone who had nothing left to lose. Internal thought. I told myself the shaking was from the cold. I was lying. The Yoon Pak estate sat at the top of Cascadia Hill like it had been there before the city was built around it. 6 acres of manicured grounds behind a 12-foot stone wall, a main house that looked more like a private museum than a home, and a front gate wide enough to drive 2 trucks through side by side. The locals called it the Emperor's Palace. Not as a compliment, as a warning. I had done my research. 3 days of reading before accepting this job. The Yoon Pak was the most dominant alpha bloodline in the Pacific Northwest. Old money, older power. 5 generations of Pak leaders who had shaped Seattle's hierarchy the way water shapes stone. Slow, certain, and permanent. The current head of the Pak was Yoon Siwon. 34 years old. Unmated. Described in every article I found as controlled, brilliant, and completely unreachable. The job was simple on paper. Estate manager. Coordinate household staff, oversee the domestic schedule, manage communication between the Pak and outside contractors. I had the qualifications. I had the references. What I had not advertised was my designation. Omega. The employment agency had processed my file with a different classification. Not forged exactly, just presented in a way that emphasized my administrative certifications over everything else. In this city, in this decade, designation discrimination was technically illegal. But the Yoon Pak had a reputation for hiring only betas in domestic staff positions. Clean boundaries, no complications, no unwanted scent dynamics inside their walls. I needed this job too much to let a technicality stop me. My name is Noh Jiho, 27 years old. Formerly employed as operations coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm that closed 8 months ago, taking my salary, my health coverage, and most of my professional confidence with it. I had been surviving on freelance work and carefully managed pride ever since. I was good at my job, organized, precise, fast. I was also an omega in a world that still found ways to make that feel like a flaw. Internal thought. My mother used to say that omegas carry warmth the way rivers carry rain. Eventually everything flows where it needs to go. I was never sure if that was wisdom or just something she told herself to feel better about the designation she passed to me. I pressed the intercom button at the gate. A voice answered immediately. Male. Flat. Beta by the clipped precision of it. Name and purpose. Noh Jiho. New estate manager. I have an appointment at 9. A pause. Then the gate clicked and swung open without another word. I walked up the stone path toward the main entrance. The grounds on either side were immaculate even in the rain. Dark hedges trimmed to perfect geometry. Japanese maple trees with their red leaves bleeding color against the gray morning. Stone lanterns spaced evenly along the path, unlit in the daylight but elegant in their stillness. Everything about this place communicated one thing: we do not make mistakes here. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and kept my posture straight. The front door opened before I reached the steps. A man stood in the frame. Late 40s, beta, wearing a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His expression was the careful neutral of someone paid to reveal nothing. Mr. No. Not a question. I am Baek Juno, head of household administration. I will be conducting your orientation. Thank you. I stepped inside. The entrance hall was exactly what the outside promised. High ceilings with exposed dark timber beams. Stone floors. A central staircase that curved upward with the kind of architectural confidence that only old money produces. The walls held framed photographs, traditional ink paintings, and a single large family crest rendered in black and gold. The air inside smelled like cedarwood and something sharper underneath. Something that made the back of my throat tighten before I could identify why. Alpha scent. Heavy, layered, and dominant. The kind that had soaked into the walls over generations. I breathed through my mouth and kept my face neutral. Baek Juno was already moving. I followed him through a corridor that opened into a wide administrative office near the east wing. Clean desk, organized shelves, a window overlooking the side garden. He walked me through the basic structure of my responsibilities with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. I was listening, taking notes in the small notebook I kept in my jacket pocket, asking the right questions at the right moments. I was good at appearing composed while reading a room. That skill had kept me employed more than once in situations that should have ended badly. What I was also doing underneath all of that was tracking the scent in the air. It was growing stronger as we moved deeper into the east wing. Not overwhelming, not aggressive, but present in a way that pressed against my omega instincts with quiet, insistent weight. Like a sound just below hearing that you feel in your chest before your ears register it. Internal thought, ignore it. You are here to work. That is all. Baek Juno stopped outside a closed door at the end of the corridor. Mr. Yoon prefers to meet all senior staff on their first day, he said. His tone carried a note of something that was almost apology. He will have final questions. I would recommend brevity and directness. He values efficiency. I nodded once. Baek Juno knocked. 3 seconds of silence. Then a voice from inside said, "Enter." Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that had never once needed to be raised to be obeyed. Every instinct I owned went absolutely still. Internal thought. The scent hit me before the door was fully open. Cedar and cold rain and something underneath that I had no name for. Something that felt terrifyingly like recognition. I stepped through the doorway. Yoon Siwon stood at the window with his back to the room, hands clasped behind him, watching the rain fall over his estate. Tall, dark suit, shoulders that carried stillness the way some people carry tension. He did not turn immediately. The silence stretched for 4 full seconds before he moved. When he finally turned and looked at me, his expression did not change. But something in his eyes did, and I caught, just beneath the cedar and the cold, the faintest thread of his scent shifting. My heartbeat stumbled. I kept my face completely still. Internal thought, he knows. He already knows what I am. And he has not said a word yet. That is either very good or very, very bad. Yoon Siwon looked at me the way people look at something that does not belong in the room. Not rude, not hostile, just precise. Like his eyes were a scanner and I was an anomaly the system had not accounted for. He held the look for exactly 3 seconds before he crossed to his desk and sat down with the kind of unhurried movement that made the air in the room reorganize itself around him. I stayed standing. Nobody had offered me a chair. I was not going to ask for one. Internal thought. Okay, so this is him. This is the famous Yoon Siwon. Noted. Moving on. Noh Jiho, he said. Not a greeting, just confirmation. He opened a folder on his desk and glanced at it once before closing it again. University of Washington. Operations and Logistics. 4 years at Hansung Freight before the company dissolved. References from 2 former supervisors and 1 industry contact. That's correct. Your agency listed your designation as unspecified. The room got very quiet. I had prepared for this moment. I had written 3 different versions of this answer in my head during the walk up the stone path. Apologetic, defensive, casually dismissive. I had decided on none of them. Unspecified is a legal classification, I said. The agency uses it when a candidate's professional record speaks more relevantly than their biology. Siwon's expression did not move. That is a very careful way of saying you withheld it. It is a very accurate way of saying it was not the most important thing in my file. 1 beat of silence. Then another. Internal thought. He is going to fire me before I even start. This is fine. Everything is fine. I have $7 and a half-eaten granola bar in my bag. Totally fine. Siwon leaned back in his chair. His gaze had not left my face since I walked in, and there was something about the steadiness of it that was harder to manage than hostility would have been. Hostility I knew how to answer. This was something else. Careful. Measuring. Like he was listening for something underneath my words. Every senior staff member in this estate is beta, he said. I'm aware. The pack dynamic here is consistent, intentional. Disruptions to scent environment affect productivity and pack cohesion. I use prescription blockers, I said. Full spectrum. You won't have a scent issue. You're on suppressants as well? Have been since I was 22. He studied me for a moment that lasted longer than was comfortable. I held eye contact. I had learned early that omegas who broke eye contact first were categorized as nervous. Nervous omegas got managed. I was not here to be managed. The role requires close proximity to pack leadership, Siwon said. Morning briefings, schedule coordination, direct communication with myself and 2 pack subordinates who reside on the estate. I understand the job description. I read it 4 times before applying. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but the hard edge of his evaluation softened by approximately 1 degree. Most candidates spend the first 10 minutes of this meeting apologizing for something, he said. I haven't done anything worth apologizing for yet. The silence that followed was different from the others. Less interrogation, more consideration. Siwon stood. He moved to the window again, angling slightly so he could see both the garden and my reflection in the glass. The rain was heavier now. It blurred the stone lanterns outside into soft orange smears against the gray. Your blockers, he said. What brand? I told him. He nodded once. Effective. Not perfect. My stomach did a slow, inconvenient drop. Internal thought, he can still smell something. Of course he can. He is a first-generation pack alpha with a bloodline older than this city's highway system. A prescription blocker was never going to be completely invisible to someone like him. This is fine. I am fine. What can you detect? I asked, because I was not the kind of person who waited for bad news to arrive on its own schedule. He turned from the window and looked at me directly. Warmth, he said. Just that. 1 word, stated the way someone states a temperature reading. Factual. Uninflected. But my body heard it differently. Something low and instinctive moved through me before I could stop it. Not obvious. Not visible. Just a slow internal shift. Like a compass needle swinging without permission towards something it recognized. I breathed out carefully through my nose. The cedar and cold rain scent in the room had done something while we were talking. It had deepened, settled, wrapped itself into the warm air between us with a quiet insistence that had nothing to do with anything I could explain logically. Internal thought, do not acknowledge it. Whatever your biology is doing right now, you will deal with it later, alone, in whatever room they put you in, with the window open and every blocker you own doubled up. Right now, you are a professional. Mr. Yoon, I said. My voice came out completely steady. I was unreasonably proud of that. I am exceptionally good at this job. I don't cause drama, I don't miss deadlines, and I've never once made a workplace situation worse by existing in it. Whatever scent I carry is medically managed and professionally irrelevant. If you want to make a hiring decision based on biology instead of competence, that is your right. But I would suggest you read my references first. Siwon looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, Baek Juno will show you to your office. I blinked. That's a yes. It is not a no. He sat back down and opened a different folder. Conversation concluded. Report at 7 tomorrow morning. I run early. I turned toward the door before my face could do anything embarrassing. Internal thought. 7 in the morning. Great. Fantastic. I accepted a job in a house that smells like the world's most dangerous candle, and my new boss just described my scent as warmth like he was reading a weather report, and somehow that is the most unsettling thing anyone has ever said to me. Baek Juno was waiting in the corridor. He took one look at my expression, which I thought was neutral, and said nothing. Smart man. We were halfway down the corridor when it happened. A door opened behind us. Fast. The scent that rolled out ahead of whoever was walking through it hit me before I heard the footsteps. Sharp and bright, like pine resin and citrus and something electric underneath. Not cedar. Not Siwon. Something younger and louder and considerably less controlled. Hyung said the new manager started today. The voice was easy and warm, aimed at Baek Juno but angled with curiosity toward me. Didn't say it was going to be interesting. I turned around. He was leaning in the doorframe with both arms raised against the frame above him, watching me with a grin that was either friendly or dangerous, and with some people those were the same thing. Dark hair pushed back from his forehead, a sleeveless training shirt damp at the collar, and eyes that were doing a full read of me with shameless, cheerful efficiency. Alpha, younger than Siwon, related by the shape of the jaw and the quality of the stillness underneath the grin. Internal thought, oh, there are more of them. Of course there are more of them. Noh Jiho, I said before he could introduce himself. Estate manager. And you are. His grin widened. Yoon Siwon, second son. The fun one. Every family has someone who says that about themselves. He laughed. Loud and genuine. The sound bounced off the stone walls of the corridor. The cedar scent from Siwon's office was still on my skin. And underneath Jaehyun's pine and citrus, underneath my own carefully managed blockers, something was quietly, stubbornly beginning to bloom. My heartbeat picked up by exactly one count. I turned back toward Baek Juno before anyone could see it. You were saying something about the office, I said. Baek Juno showed me an office that was clean, quiet, and aggressively neutral. White walls, a desk facing a window that looked out over the east garden. A filing cabinet that had been recently emptied judging by the faint smell of old paper still clinging to the drawer handles. A small attached bathroom with a single shelf above the sink where I immediately lined up my blocker prescription, my backup blocker prescription, and the emergency blocker patches I kept in the front pocket of my duffel bag like a person who absolutely did not have a problem. Internal thought, I do not have a problem. I have a situation. There is a difference. Problem implies I cannot manage it. A situation just means I need a better system. Baek Juno stood in the doorway while I unpacked with the quiet patience of someone waiting for a question he already knew the answer to. The estate has 12 full-time staff, he said. 8 live on the grounds in the staff quarters at the north end. The remaining 4 commute. You will have a room in the east wing, separate from the main pack quarters by 2 corridors and a secured door. The secured door requires a code? It requires pack authorization. Staff do not have access to the main residential wing without invitation. Understood. I set my notebook on the desk and clicked my pen twice. Force of habit. Who do I report to directly? Mr. Yoon. Daily briefings at 7. He reviews the household schedule, external appointments, and any contractor communications. His younger brother, Yoon Siwon, manages the estate's training facility and security rotations. You will coordinate with him on scheduling conflicts. The third pack member in residence is Yoon Siwon. He handles the pack's external business interests and is rarely on the grounds before noon. I wrote all 3 names down. 3 alphas. 1 estate. 1 Omega estate manager with a prescription blocker and a very professional attitude. Baek Juno looked at me with an expression that suggested he found me either mildly alarming or mildly entertaining, and had not yet decided which. Mr. Yoon reviewed your references before this morning's meeting. He does not make personnel decisions impulsively. Is that his way of saying he thought about it and hired me anyway? It is my way of saying he expects results. He paused. And discretion. Those are my 2 best qualities. He almost smiled. Almost. Dinner for household staff is at 6 in the East Kitchen. I would recommend attending tonight. The staff will have questions about you. Better they ask them while you are present than after. He left me to it. I sat on the edge of the desk and took one full breath. The room smelled like nothing. Clean air, faint lemon from the recently wiped surfaces, and the cool damp of the rain still pressing against the window. No alpha scent reaching this far. The 2 corridors and the secured door were doing their job. My nervous system, however, was not getting the message. Internal thought, warmth. He said warmth. Who says that? Who smells something through a full-spectrum blocker and just calmly reports it like a barometric reading? Yoon Siwon, apparently. Yoon Siwon, who has shoulders like a structural support beam and a voice that belongs on a warning label. I stood up, rolled my neck until it cracked, and opened my notebook to a fresh page. Job 1. Survive the first week. Job 2. Do not let your Omega biology embarrass you in front of people who were specifically trying not to hire an Omega. Job 3. Learn the schedule, nail the role, prove the point. I wrote all 3 down. Underlined the third one twice. The staff dinner was in 2 hours. I had exactly that long to learn the layout of the East Wing, locate the kitchen, and build the kind of calm professional face that said I belong here and not the kind that said I am currently being slowly dismantled by cedar and cold rain sent from a room I left 40 minutes ago. I found the East kitchen by following the smell of doenjang jjigae. It hit me halfway down the 3rd corridor and my stomach made a sound that I chose not to acknowledge. Someone in this estate could cook. Genuinely cook. The kind of fermented, slow-built, deeply savory smell that required patience and intention. It was so distinctly and specifically Korean that it loosened something in my chest I had not realized was tight. The kitchen was large and warm and already occupied by 4 staff members seated around a rectangular table when I walked in. The cook, a compact woman in her 50s who I would later learn was called Auntie Mun by everyone including the alphas, looked up from the stove and evaluated me in approximately 3 seconds. New manager? She asked. Noh Jiho. Yes. Sit. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday. Internal thought. It was actually Monday, but I was not going to argue with someone holding a ladle. I sat. The other 4 staff members introduced themselves in the quick, efficient way of people who spend most of their time working rather than talking. I cataloged names and roles with the part of my brain that ran on automatic while the other part was busy managing the fact that the cedar scent had followed me. Not strongly, not intrusively, just a thread of it, clinging to the collar of my jacket from the time I spent in Siwon's office. Every time I shifted in my chair it moved through the warm kitchen air and reminded me of something I was actively trying not to think about. I took off my jacket and hung it on the back of the chair. Better. Slightly. Auntie Mun set a bowl in front of me without being asked. Rice, jjigae, a small dish of kimchi that smelled like it had been fermenting for at least 2 weeks. It was extraordinary. The kind of food that made the body remember it was allowed to rest. The conversation around the table was cautious at first. Careful questions about my background, my experience, whether I had worked in a pack estate before. No, I said honestly. But I've managed larger operations with more complicated stakeholders. Packs run on hierarchy and schedule. I understand both. Mr. Yoon runs a tight house, said one of the groundskeepers. His name was Seongmin. Mid-30s, cautious eyes. Previous manager lasted 4 months. What happened? Couldn't keep up with the pace. I can keep up. The one before that lasted 6 weeks. I looked at him. Are you trying to discourage me or just making conversation? He considered this. Both, maybe. Internal thought. Honest. I respected that. 6 weeks is an embarrassing number, I said pleasantly. I intend to make it significantly longer. Auntie Mun made a sound from the stove that might have been approval. The door to the kitchen swung open at that precise moment and Yoon Jae-han walked in still wearing his training clothes, hair damp from what smelled like a recent shower, and carrying the easy entitlement of someone who had eaten in this kitchen his entire life. He stopped when he saw me. The grin from the corridor came back immediately. You found the kitchen. It smelled like jjigae. I'm not complicated. He dropped into the chair across from me like gravity was optional for him. Auntie Mun was already moving with a second bowl. He accepted it without looking, eyes still on me, and the quality of his attention was the kind that would have been flattering if I had not been actively trying to establish professional neutrality. How was the office? He asked. Functional. How was the meeting with Hyung? I picked up my spoon. Professional. Jae-han tilted his head. You're not going to tell me anything, are you? I work for your brother. Sharing details of my first meeting with him feels like a boundary violation on day 1. He pointed at me with his chopsticks. I like you. You don't know me. I know you looked my brother in the face and didn't flinch. Half his executive contacts can't manage that. He ate a spoonful of jjigae. The other half flinch and then pretend they didn't. Internal thought. And which category do you fall into? I wanted to ask. But I already knew. Jae-han was the kind of person who had never needed to flinch because he had never needed to be afraid of anything. That kind of easy confidence was either very safe or very dangerous to be around. The pine and citrus scent across the table pressed lightly against my blockers. I focused on my bowl. Across the table, Jae-han was still watching me with that cheerful, calculating warmth. And from somewhere deeper in the estate, faint and distant and completely uninvited, the thread of cedar reached me again through the kitchen's warm air. My grip on my spoon tightened by 1 degree. Internal thought: denial is a perfectly valid coping strategy. I stand by it completely. Dinner ended. The kitchen emptied. I washed my own bowl without being asked because I was raised by a woman who believed that a person who left dirty dishes for others to handle was a person with a character deficiency. Auntie Mun watched me do it and said nothing. But when I set the bowl on the drying rack, she handed me a small container of leftover kimchi without making eye contact. That was how I knew I had passed some kind of test. Internal thought: small victories. I would collect them all. Jae-han had left midway through the second helping, called away by something on his phone that made his easy expression go briefly serious before he smoothed it back out. He had pointed at me on his way out the door and said, 7 a.m. briefing. Don't be late. Hyung is genuinely frightening before his coffee. Then he was gone, pine and citrus fading down the corridor behind him. I carried my bag to the room Baek Juno had assigned me. It was simple: a bed, a wardrobe, a small desk, and the window I had already mentally claimed for the purpose of maximum ventilation. I set my second blocker prescription on the nightstand, changed into clean clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed with my notebook open to the page where I had written the 3 job rules. I added a 4th: learn the building's scent geography. Every estate had zones. Scent pooled differently in different rooms depending on who spent time there, how the air circulated, and what emotional weight a space carried over years of habitation. I needed to know which corridors ran hot with alpha presence and which ones were safe for an omega running on blockers and professional determination. The 2 corridors and the secured door were a good buffer. But I had already discovered that cedar traveled further than it should in this building. Something about the stone walls and the high ceilings moved air in ways that a standard floor plan would not. Internal thought: this is fine. I have managed worse. I once ran logistics for a shipping company where 3 of the 5 department heads actively hated each other and 2 of them were secretly in a territorial dispute over a parking space. I can handle 1 alpha scent with good ventilation habits. I turned off the light and lay back on the bed. The rain was still going. It tapped against the window glass with the patient rhythm of something that had nowhere else to be. I listened to it and let my body decompress from the hours of sustained performance. Holding composure was physical work. Most people did not understand that. The straight spine, the level gaze, the voice kept steady through things that wanted to shake it. Cost something real. I could feel the bill coming due behind my eyes. I was almost at the edge of sleep when the fire alarm went off. Not a gentle tone. The full industrial shriek of a system that meant business. Red emergency lighting strobed on in the corridor outside my door. I was on my feet and moving before conscious thought caught up, grabbing my phone and keycard and jacket by pure muscle memory. The corridor was already busy. 2 staff members I recognized from dinner were moving toward the east exit. Baek Juno's voice carrying from somewhere ahead with the focused calm of someone running an evacuation drill he had personally designed. East exit. All staff east exit. Do not use the elevator. I followed the flow through the door at the end of the corridor and out into the rain. The estate's east courtyard was stone-paved and already collecting half an inch of water. Security lights had come on across the grounds, turning the rain into silver curtains. Staff clustered near the covered colonnade along the east wall while 2 security team members moved through the building in high-visibility gear. I found a spot under the colonnade, pulled my jacket tighter, and counted heads. 12 staff. Baek Juno had said 12 full-time staff. I counted 11. Internal thought: Auntie Mun. She had still been in the kitchen when I left. I turned back toward the east door. Baek Juno caught my arm. Staff stay outside during evacuation. I counted 11. Someone is still inside. He did a rapid count of his own. His expression shifted. He pressed his earpiece. Security. Confirm all kitchen staff are out. A beat, then a crackle. East kitchen is clear. One occupant moving toward the east corridor now. I exhaled. Then the east door opened and Auntie Mun walked out carrying her ladle and the container of kimchi she had apparently decided was worth the evacuation delay. She looked at the rain, looked at the ladle, and said something under her breath in Korean that made two of the younger staff cover their mouths. Internal thought. I wanted to hug her. I maintained professionalism. False alarm, said the security lead over the radio. System trigger in the West Wing. 'Cause being investigated. The staff began moving back inside. I turned with them and walked directly into something solid, warm, and immovable. I stepped back and looked up. Yoon Siwon stood in the east doorway. He had come from inside, not outside, which meant he had been doing his own sweep rather than waiting in the designated Alpha assembly point like the estate's emergency protocol presumably required. He was wearing a dark jacket over what looked like work clothes, hair slightly damp from the rain that had caught him somewhere between inside and out. His eyes found me immediately with the same scanning precision as the office. You were going back in, he said. It was not a question. He had seen me start to move. One of your staff wasn't accounted for, I said. Security was handling it. Security was on the radio. I was closer to the door. Something moved across his expression. Not the almost amusement from earlier. Something quieter and less categorizable. He looked at me for 2 full seconds in the rain-silver light before stepping aside to let the returning staff through. I moved to step past him. The doorway was narrow. The returning staff pressed us both toward the same side of the frame, and suddenly there was significantly less space between us than there had been in his office. His cedar and cold rain scent hit me at full proximity. No corridors between us. No large room to dilute it. Just the door frame and 4 inches of charged air. My blocker held. My expression held. My heartbeat did not hold even slightly. Internal thought. 4 inches. That is all. I have survived worse distances. I am absolutely fine. Your blocker is at half strength, Siwon said quietly. He was not looking at me. He was watching the last staff member's file past. The rain affects the compound absorption. I stared at the side of his face. You can tell that. Yes. Right now. In the rain. With staff moving past us. Yes. Internal thought. He has the scent sensitivity of a search and rescue dog and the conversational delivery of a building inspection report, and I am in so much trouble. I'll double the dose tonight, I said. There is a pack physician on retainer. Dr. Lim. She can adjust your prescription for climate variables. I don't need a doctor adjustment. I need the rain to stop. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. A fraction of movement that the rest of his face immediately corrected. But I saw it. I cataloged it in the part of my brain that was collecting data on Yoon Siwon the way a person collects evidence for a case they already know they are going to lose. The last staff member passed through the door. We were briefly alone in the doorframe. The rain fell around us in silver curtains. The security lights turned the wet stone into something almost beautiful. His scent settled around me in the enclosed space with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with biology and extremely inconvenient chemistry. Mr. Noh, he said. Yes. You start properly tomorrow. I'm aware. Tonight does not count toward your performance assessment. I looked at him. Was going back for a missing staff member going to negatively affect my performance assessment? He held my gaze. No. Then we agree it was the correct call. This time the corner of his mouth moved and did not immediately correct itself. 7 a.m., he said. He stepped inside. I followed 1 breath later. The warmth of the estate closed around me. The rain kept falling outside. And somewhere between the door frame and the corridor my heartbeat was still running 3 counts ahead of where it should have been. Internal thought. Denial. Still valid. Still completely in effect. The fact that I know exactly how many inches of air were between us in that doorway is entirely irrelevant. 7 a.m. arrived the way all early mornings arrive when you have not slept properly. Aggressively. I was already dressed, notebook open, coffee from the east kitchen in hand. standing outside the briefing room door at 6:58, because I was not going to be the person who showed up late on day one of actually starting. I had too much to prove and too little margin for error. Baek Juno arrived at 6:59 and looked mildly surprised to find me already there. Internal thought, good. Let that be the baseline expectation from here forward. The briefing room was off the main administrative corridor. Long table, 8 chairs, a wall screen for schedule display, and windows along one side that looked out over the front grounds where the rain had finally, mercifully stopped. The morning light came through gray and clean and turned everything in the room the color of new paper. Jaehan arrived at 7 on the dot, dropped into a chair sideways with one leg over the armrest, and pointed at my coffee. Where did you get that? Kitchen. It was made and waiting. Auntie Mun apparently operates on a schedule that starts before dawn. She has operated on that schedule since before I was born. I have never once successfully beaten her to the kitchen. He looked genuinely offended by this. Not once. In 31 years. Have you tried waking up earlier? I have tried accepting defeat. It's healthier. Internal thought. I was starting to understand why Jaehan was described as the fun one. He had the particular energy of someone who had decided a long time ago that charm was more efficient than effort and had built an entire personality around that decision. Dangerously likable. I was keeping both eyes open. The third chair filled 60 seconds later. I had heard about Yoon Siwon from Baek Juno's introduction. External business. Rarely on grounds before noon. So his presence at a 7 a.m. briefing registered before I had time to prepare an expression for it. He was different from his brothers in the way that a still lake is different from moving water. Same strong bone structure as Siwon, same dark coloring, but where Siwon carried his authority like architecture and Jaehan wore his like a comfortable shirt, Siwon carried his like a coat he could take off whenever he chose. He was the youngest of the three by the look of him, late 20s, and his eyes when they landed on me held a quality I had not encountered yet in this building. Genuine curiosity. The open, unhurried kind. You're the Omega estate manager, he said. Not accusing. Just naming the fact. Noh Jiho. Yes. Siwon. He sat down across from me. Hyung hired you himself? He did. Siwon glanced at Jaehan. Something passed between them in the way things pass between siblings who have spent years developing a private language. Jaehan's mouth curved. Siwon looked back at me with an expression that had added a new layer underneath the curiosity. Internal thought. They were surprised. Not that an Omega was hired. That Siwon had hired one. There was a story there and I was standing in the middle of it without having read the first chapter. Siwon arrived at 7 exactly. The room's atmospheric pressure adjusted in the way it does when the person everyone has been unconsciously waiting for finally walks in. He took the head of the table, set down a slim folder, and looked at me once before beginning. Schedule review, he said. Mr. Noh will run the briefing from tomorrow. This morning he observes. I opened my notebook. The briefing was efficient. Siwon moved through the week's estate requirements with the focused economy of someone who had been doing this long enough that the structure was internal. Contractor visits, pack business appointments, a security rotation change Jaehan needed to process, 2 external meetings Siwon was coordinating from the estate rather than his downtown office. I wrote everything, cross-referenced it against the digital calendar Baek Juno had given me access to the night before, flagged 2 scheduling conflicts before Siwon reached them. Thursday afternoon, I said. The contractor inspection and your 2 o'clock business call overlap by 40 minutes. Siwon paused. The inspection was scheduled last week. The call was added to the calendar yesterday evening. If I move the inspection to the morning and shift the call to 3, both run clean. A beat. Then, do it. Internal thought. That was the easiest win I had ever gotten. I wrote it down to remember the feeling. The briefing ended at 7:40. Jaehan unfolded himself from his sideways chair position and announced that he had a training rotation to supervise. Siwon gathered his things quietly and paused beside me on his way out. The previous manager, he said low enough that it was just for me. He lasted 4 months. Do you know why he left? Seongmin told me he couldn't keep up with the pace. Haewon shook his head. Just once. Barely perceptible. He left because he found out something about this pack that the agency file doesn't include. He said it without drama, without pressure. Just information, offered clean. I thought you should know that before you get too settled. I looked at him steadily. What did he find out? Haewon glanced toward the door where Siwon had already exited. Then back at me. That Siwon hasn't always been this controlled. He picked up his folder. He was bonded once. 8 years ago. His mate died. And the version of him that existed before that is the reason this estate has the reputation it does. The room felt different after he said it. Not smaller, just heavier. Like the air had absorbed something and was holding it. Internal thought. A dead mate. 8 years. That explained the architecture of him. The way his authority had grief built into its foundation. The way control, for Siwon, was not a personality trait but a survival structure. Something he had built over a loss that I had just been handed without warning. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Haewon stopped in the doorway. Because you're good at this job. I could see that in 40 minutes. He paused. And because whatever is already happening in this house, it would be better if you understood what you were walking into. He left. I sat with that for a moment. Just a moment. Then I picked up my pen, turned to a fresh page in my notebook, and wrote. Find out what happened 8 years ago. Not out of nosiness. Not out of the low pull of biographical sympathy that I could already feel pressing against my better judgment. But because Haewon was right. I was already standing in the middle of something I had not read the beginning of. And I needed to understand the whole story if I was going to do this job without making a mistake I could not walk back. I was closing my notebook when the briefing room door opened again. Siwon stood in the frame. He had come back for the folder he had left on the table. He crossed to it, picked it up, and then stopped. He looked at my notebook, specifically at my face while I was looking at my notebook. Haewon said something, he said. It was not a question. His scent had shifted by something microscopic. Cedar pulled slightly tighter, like a person who hears their name spoken in the next room and goes very still. I met his eyes. He gave me professional context. What kind? I held the eye contact for a full 3 seconds. The kind that helps me do my job better. Siwon looked at me with an expression that was doing many things simultaneously and showing none of them cleanly. Then he said, my personal history is not relevant to estate operations. I know. Haewon oversteps sometimes. He thinks it is kindness. I think he might be right about that. The silence that followed was the longest one we had shared. It had texture to it. The weight of 8 years in it, pressed thin and flat under everything he had built on top. His jaw tightened by 1 degree. 7 a.m. tomorrow, he said. You run the briefing. He left. I sat in the empty room with the morning light coming gray and clean through the windows, the ghost of cedar still hanging in the air, and the specific ache of knowing something about a person that made them suddenly, inconveniently, and completely human. Internal thought, he was bonded once. He lost someone. And every wall in this building is something he constructed afterward. I am not going to feel things about that. I am absolutely not going to feel things about that. Starting now. I felt things about it immediately. I gave myself exactly 4 minutes to feel things about Yoon Siwon's dead mate and the 8 years of controlled grief he had built this entire estate around. For minutes. That was my limit. I had learned a long time ago that feelings without a time boundary had a tendency to colonize everything, and I could not afford that kind of interior real estate right now. At minute 5 I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to the east wing to begin the actual work. The estate ran on a schedule that rewarded precision. I discovered this in the first 3 hours of genuinely operating as estate manager rather than observing. Every contractor, every delivery, every external communication had a window. Miss the window and the entire day's structure shifted like pulled thread in fabric. The previous manager had apparently handled this with a combination of printed spreadsheets and hope. I rebuilt the entire tracking system in the estate's digital calendar before noon, cross-referenced it against the household budget Beck Juno provided, and flagged 4 recurring costs that were running above market rate. I sent the summary to Siwon's email with a note that said, "Preliminary audit attached. These 4-line items warrant renegotiation at next contractor review. I can handle the communications if you want to approve the approach first." His reply came in 11 minutes. One word. Approved. Internal thought, 11 minutes. The man ran 3 simultaneous pack operations and still responded to estate emails faster than most people respond to texts. I respected it deeply and found it slightly unnerving. Jaehan appeared at my office door at 2 in the afternoon with the energy of someone who had been exercising since dawn and found it invigorating rather than punishing. He leaned against the doorframe and watched me type for approximately 30 seconds before he spoke. "You reorganized the whole calendar. It needed reorganizing. The previous manager spent 3 weeks building that system. His system had 6 redundant categories and no conflict alerts. Mine took 2 hours. I kept typing. Did you need something specific, or is this a social visit? Haewon wants to know if you eat lunch." I stopped typing. "That is a strange question. He noticed you didn't take a lunch break. He gets concerned about people skipping meals. It's his thing." Jaehan shrugged with the ease of someone who had long accepted the gentle eccentricities of his younger brother. "He will absolutely send Auntie Mun with a tray if you don't come to the kitchen voluntarily." Internal thought, Yoon Haewon, youngest of 3 dominant alphas in a pack estate with a fortress reputation, and his primary concern at 2 p.m. was whether the new staff member had eaten. I genuinely did not know what to do with that. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. Jaehan pointed at me approvingly and disappeared. The kitchen held Haewon, a pot of doenjang jjigae that Auntie Mun had apparently left on low heat for exactly this contingency, and the specific quality of afternoon light that comes through west-facing windows and turns everything gold and slow. Haewon was already seated with his own bowl, reviewing something on his phone with the relaxed focus of someone who had learned to work in comfortable spaces rather than formal ones. He looked up when I came in, gestured at the pot, and went back to his phone without ceremony. I served myself and sat. We ate in silence for a full 2 minutes. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that existed between people who did not need to fill space to justify their presence. I found that I liked it. "You fixed the Thursday schedule conflict," Haewon said eventually. "It was straightforward. The last manager let those stack for 2 weeks before Siwon noticed and handled it himself." He glanced up. "Siwon handling things himself is never the preferred outcome. He does it correctly, but the atmosphere afterward requires approximately 48 hours of recovery." Internal thought. I was building a very specific picture of what this pack looked like before I arrived, and none of it was making the cedar scent easier to manage. "The audit findings," I said. "The 4 cost overruns. Does he usually review those himself, or does he delegate?" "He reviews everything himself." Haewon set down his spoon. "He has reviewed everything himself for 8 years. It is partly efficiency and partly the fact that control is how he stays functional." He said it without judgment, the way someone describes weather. Before Kang Mi-ho died, he was different. More delegation, more trust. After, he lifted one shoulder. The pack contracted around him. We adapted. Kang Mi-ho, that was the name. 8 years ago. I held it quietly and did not ask the follow-up question that was sitting at the front of my mouth. Haewon looked at me with that open, unhurried curiosity again. "You're not going to ask. It's not my business. Most people ask immediately. I'm not most people. I'm his estate manager." I finished the last of my jjigae. If he wants me to know more, he'll tell me. If he doesn't, the job gets done either way. Haewon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, for someone running on prescription blockers in a house full of alphas, you are remarkably composed." "Thank you." It wasn't entirely a compliment. I'm also noting that it looks expensive. The composure. Like it costs you something to maintain it. I looked at him across the table. He looked back with the expression of someone who understood more than he was currently saying and had decided to offer that understanding as a gift rather than a weapon. Internal thought. I liked Yoon Haewon. That felt important to acknowledge internally and dangerous to acknowledge out loud. Everything worthwhile costs something, I said. He nodded once, like I had confirmed something he already believed. The kitchen door opened. Siwon walked in. He stopped when he saw us both at the table. His gaze moved from Haewon to me to the two empty bowls to the comfortable quality of the silence we had been sitting in. Something crossed his expression that was gone before I could name it. I was looking for the contractor file, he said. To me. Baek Juno said you had reorganized the physical records. East Wing office. Second shelf, labeled by quarter. The current quarter is tabbed in red. He nodded. Did not move immediately. Haewon picked up his phone again with the serene attention of someone watching something interesting from a safe distance. Internal thought, he was not here for the contractor file. Or he was, but that was not the only reason he had walked into the kitchen at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon when his schedule showed back-to-back calls until 4. I was not going to say that out loud. The audit summary, Siwon said. The fourth line item. The landscaping contractor. You flagged it at 30% above market rate. 32%. I pulled 3 comparable quotes this morning. Baek Juno has used that contractor for 6 years. Loyalty is valuable. 32% above market rate for 6 consecutive years is also a significant sum. I held his gaze. I'm not recommending termination. I'm recommending renegotiation with the existing relationship intact. The contractor likely doesn't know you haven't compared rates recently. Siwon looked at me with the scanning precision I was beginning to recognize as his version of being impressed while refusing to show it. Draft the renegotiation letter, he said. I'll review it before it goes out. Already started. The corner of his mouth. That fraction of movement. There and then smoothed away. He turned to leave. Siwon. Haewon's voice was easy and casual and landed like a stone in still water. Sit down. Auntie Mun left Jigi. The silence that followed had a very specific texture. Haewon staring at his phone. Me very carefully looking at my empty bowl. Siwon standing at the door with his back to us and the particular stillness of a person receiving an invitation they do not know how to accept. He sat down. Haewon served him without looking up from his phone. I refilled my water glass. Nobody said anything for 90 seconds. Then Siwon said, quietly to no one in particular, the renegotiation letter. Include the 6-year tenure in the opening paragraph. Frame the rate review as a forward partnership discussion, not a correction. Already in the draft, I said. He looked at me. Really looked. Not the scan. Something slower and less defended than that. Internal thought. There it was. Underneath all that architecture. Just a person eating jjigae in a warm kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, letting himself be still for 5 minutes. And I was sitting 2 feet away from it with a heartbeat that had completely abandoned any pretense of professional neutrality. The afternoon light turned everything gold. The cedar settled around me like it had decided this was where it lived now. I did not move away from it. That was the mistake. Not a loud one. Not a visible one. Just the quiet, irreversible decision of a body that had stopped pretending it did not recognize something it had been trying to avoid since the moment I walked through that front door. Internal thought. For minutes. I needed 4 minutes and a new coping strategy. Immediately. The 4 minutes never came. What came instead was 3 days of the most productive, most professionally satisfying, and most emotionally complicated work I had done in my entire career. 3 days of 7 a.m. briefings where I ran the table with clean efficiency, while something underneath the professionalism hummed at a frequency I refused to name. 3 days of Jaehan making me laugh in corridors when I was trying to be serious, Haewon leaving tea outside my office door without comment, and Siwon reviewing every document I produced with the focused attention of someone who had stopped expecting to be surprised and was being surprised anyway. 3 days of cedar settling around me like it had forwarded its mail to my nervous system. Internal thought. I was handling it. That was my position and I was committed to it. The renegotiation letter went out on Wednesday. The landscaping contractor responded within 4 hours, agreed to a revised rate, and thanked the estate for the continued partnership. Siwon read the response, looked at me across the briefing table and said, "Good. That single word from him carried the emotional weight of a standing ovation from anyone else, and I had somehow learned to receive it as exactly that. Thursday ran clean. No schedule conflicts. Both blocks landed perfectly. Friday morning was when everything broke. I arrived at the briefing room at 6:58 as usual. The door was already open. Voices inside. I caught the tone before the words because tone travels further than content, and the tone in that room was wrong. Tight and low and carrying the specific vibration of a conversation that had been going on long enough to calcify. I stopped outside the door. Internal thought, walk in or wait. Walking in was professional. Waiting felt like eavesdropping. I chose professional and immediately regretted it. Siwon stood at the head of the table. Across from him, not seated, was a man I had not seen before in the estate. Late 30s. Alpha by the broad set of his scent which hit me even from the doorway. Something smoky and aggressive that pressed against my blockers with the blunt confidence of someone who did not believe in courtesy distances. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that was expensive in the way that wanted you to notice. His posture was the specific posture of someone who had once been in the same room as Siwon as an equal and had never fully accepted that the dynamic had changed. Jaehan stood near the window, arms crossed, the easy warmth entirely gone from his expression. What was underneath it was something harder and considerably less friendly. Haewon was not in the room. The man in the charcoal suit saw me first. His eyes moved over me with the unhurried assessment of someone categorizing a variable. Then something in his expression shifted into a smile that had no warmth in it at all. "The new estate manager," he said. "I heard you hired someone interesting, Siwon." I walked in because stopping in the doorway would have been worse. I took my usual chair, opened my notebook, and looked at Siwon. "Should I come back at a different time?" "No." Siwon's voice was even. "We're finishing. Are we?" The man in the suit did not sit. He moved instead, a slow half-circle around the table end that was theatrical in its deliberateness. "I came to discuss the Northern Territory boundary review. Your manager will need to know about it eventually anyway if he's handling your scheduling." "His name is Noh Jiho," Jaehan said, flat. "Use it." The man smiled at Jaehan with the smile of someone who found pushback entertaining. Yoon Jaehan, still playing guard dog. "Oh, I'm not playing," Jaehan said. Internal thought. I did not know who this person was, but I knew exactly what he was. The kind of alpha who measured every room by how much of it he could claim. I had met 3 of them in my professional life, and every single encounter had required a specific combination of composure and surgical precision to navigate without incident. "I don't believe we've been introduced," I said to the man directly. Level voice. Neutral expression. Notebook open like we were about to discuss quarterly projections. He looked at me with mild surprise, as if he had not expected to be addressed so directly. Then the smile again, recalibrated. "Shin Wookyung. I run the Shin Pack. Siwon and I have a long history. Noh Jiho. I manage this estate." I clicked my pen once. "The Northern Territory Boundary Review. Is that a scheduled item for today's briefing, or is it something that needs a dedicated meeting block?" Shin Wookyung stared at me for a moment. Then he laughed. Short and sharp. "He's efficient. I'll give you that, Siwon." Siwon had not looked away from Shin Wookyung since I walked in. "The boundary discussion is concluded," he said. "My answer is the same as it was 20 minutes ago. Your answer 8 years ago was different." The room temperature dropped by several degrees. Internal thought, 8 years. There it was. Kang Miho's shadow walking into the room wearing a charcoal suit. 8 years ago, Siwon said, and his voice had gone to the place underneath controlled that I had not heard before. A place that was very quiet and very final. The circumstances were different. The bond was different, Shin Wookyung said. He tilted his head. Performed casual. Miho always said the Yoon Pack was too isolated. Too proud. He wanted connection with the Shin Pack. He asked for it. Pause precisely timed. Before the end. The silence that followed was the kind that exists after something has been detonated. Jaehan's jaw was tight enough to cut glass. Siwon stood completely still with the stillness of someone who has taken a blow to the chest and is deciding whether to let anyone see the impact. And I was sitting at the table watching it happen with my notebook open and my pen in my hand, and the specific helpless clarity of someone who understands that what they are witnessing is an old wound being opened with deliberate, practiced cruelty. Internal thought. Say something. Don't say something. This is not your territory. This is 8 years of grief and pack politics and a dead man's name being used as a leverage tool, and none of it belongs to you. I said something. Mr. Shin. My voice came out clean and professional and completely steady. Invoking the preferences of a deceased pack member to pressure a current pack leader into a territorial concession is not a negotiation strategy. It's a manipulation tactic. I closed my notebook. If the Shin pack has a legitimate boundary claim, I'm happy to schedule a formal review meeting with the appropriate documentation. If not, I think this briefing is done. The room held its breath. Shin Woo-kyung turned to look at me fully for the first time. The performance of amusement was gone. What was underneath it was considerably less friendly and considerably more honest. Interesting hire, he said to Siwon. Quiet. Pointed. Does he know what he's walking into? He knows exactly what he's doing, Jaehan said. Shin Woo-kyung straightened his jacket. Smiled one more time with nothing behind it. I'll see myself out. He moved toward the door, stopped level with my chair, and looked down at me with an expression I catalogued carefully and completely. Noh Jiho. I'll remember that name. He left. The door clicked shut. Jaehan exhaled loudly and dropped into his chair. I genuinely cannot stand that man. I turned to look at Siwon. He was looking at me, not with the scan, not with the almost amusement, with something stripped of every layer he usually kept in place. Raw and unguarded, and there for approximately 4 seconds before the control came back down over it like a curtain. You didn't need to do that, he said. I know, I said. I did it anyway. His jaw worked once. Shin Woo-kyung does not forget things. Neither do I. Another silence. Jaehan was looking between us with the expression of someone watching something important happen and having the rare good sense not to interrupt it. Siwon picked up his folder. His hands were completely steady. Every exterior surface was back in place. But the cedar scent in the room had shifted into something that pressed against my chest with a weight that had nothing clinical about it. The briefing is postponed, he said. 1 hour. He walked out. I sat with my closed notebook and Jaehan's careful silence and the knowledge that I had just inserted myself into 8 years of someone else's grief and made an enemy of a man who ran the second most powerful pack in Seattle. Internal thought. Professional. Composed. Completely in control. Absolutely fine. The fact that my hands are shaking slightly under this table is entirely irrelevant and no one saw it. Jaehan saw it. He reached across the table and set his hand briefly over mine. Just for a second. Warm and grounding and gone before I could react to it. He hasn't let anyone do that for him in 8 years, Jaehan said quietly. Stand in that gap. He paused. I don't think he knows what to do with it. I stared at the closed door. Internal thought. Neither do I. Jaehan's hand was gone from mine before I could decide how to feel about the fact that it had been there. He stood up, rolled his shoulders, and became the version of himself that existed when he was done being soft about something. Easier. Lighter. The pivot was smooth enough that I almost missed the deliberateness of it. Postponed briefing means I have an hour, he said. I'm going to go hit something in the training room. He picked up his phone. You should find Siwon. I looked at him. That is a terrible idea. Probably. He headed for the door. Do it anyway. He left me with that. No further argument. No strategic reasoning. Just the casual devastation of someone who had decided that the most helpful thing he could do was remove himself from the equation and leave me with the obvious choice. Internal thought. I was not going to find Siwon. I was going to sit here for exactly as long as the postponed briefing lasted, reorganize the contractor file tabs by color instead of just by quarter, and pretend that the last 40 minutes had been a professional incident rather than an emotional one. That was my plan. It was a good plan. I found Siwon in 7 minutes. Not because I went looking. Because the estate was a specific size and Cedar traveled specific distances, and when I left the briefing room to get water from the east corridor and told myself I was not tracking the scent, I was absolutely tracking the scent. He was in the east garden. The rain had stayed away since the first night and the morning was cold and bright, the kind of Seattle morning that looked like an apology for all the gray. He stood near the Japanese maple at the garden center with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets and his back to the building, looking at nothing specific in the way people look at things when they are actually looking inward. I stopped on the stone path. Internal thought. Okay, here is the situation. A man is standing in a garden processing 8 years of grief that just got publicly weaponized over a breakfast table. I am standing 10 feet behind him with a water glass and feelings I have not given myself permission to name. The professional move is to go back inside. The human move is something else entirely. I walked to the bench near the maple and sat down. Not close enough to intrude. Not far enough to pretend I was somewhere else. Just present. Available. The way someone sits in a hospital waiting room, not because they can fix anything but because leaving would be worse. Siwon did not turn around for 2 full minutes. When he did, he looked at me with an expression that had stopped trying to be unreadable. Not open exactly, but honest in its exhaustion. The 8 years were visible in it in a way they had not been before Shin Woo-kyung walked into the briefing room and pulled the pin on all of it. You followed the scent, he said. It was not an accusation. Just a statement of fact delivered the way he delivered most facts. Clean and direct and somehow more intimate for it. Yes, I said, because lying would have been insulting to both of us. He walked to the other end of the bench and sat. Not close, appropriate distance. But the same bench which in the language of people who moved carefully around each other meant something. The garden was quiet. A bird moved through the maple above us, shaking loose a handful of red leaves that drifted down through the cold, bright air. The estate wall rose at the garden's edge, stone and moss, blocking the sound of the city beyond it. Miho would have liked you, Siwon said. I did not expect that. I held very still and let it settle. He liked people who said the thing in the room that everyone else was performing ignorance about. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it that had weight and age. He was like that himself. Direct. Honest past the point of comfort sometimes. He sounds like someone worth knowing, I said carefully. He was. A pause. He was also someone who trusted the wrong people. Who believed that pack alliances were built on good faith because his own faith was genuinely good. His jaw tightened. Shin Woo-kyung was one of the people he trusted. The boundary negotiation 8 years ago was Miho's initiative. His belief that the two packs could be something better than rivals. He stopped, started again. He died before it concluded, and Woo-kyung has been using that unfinished thing as a lever ever since. Internal thought. There it was, the whole shape of it. The grief and the guilt and the specific torment of watching someone you loved be used as a bargaining chip by the person whose bad faith contributed to his vulnerability in the first place. 8 years of that. No wonder every wall in this building was load-bearing. That's why you review everything yourself, I said. He looked at me. The control. The self-sufficiency. You stopped trusting other people to manage things because the last time you did, the cost was something you couldn't recover from professionally. So you made yourself the single point of failure instead. I held his gaze. It's not a criticism. It's just what I see. The silence that followed was different from every other silence we had shared. It had no performance in it. No evaluation. Just two people sitting on a bench in a cold, bright garden with the maple leaves coming down around them and something true hanging in the air between them that neither of us had planned to put there. You've been here less than a week, he said. I read fast. Something moved through his expression. Not the fraction of almost amusement. Something fuller and less defended than that, present for a full 3 seconds before it found its shape. It was grief and recognition and something tender underneath both of them. My chest did something complicated and irreversible. Internal thought. There it is. The thing I have been managing around since the doorframe in the rain. I am not just attracted to this man. I see him. And worse, he is starting to let me. and I do not know what to do with either of those facts except sit here and breathe through them like a person with functioning coping mechanisms, which I theoretically am. I owe you an apology, Siwon said. I blinked. For what specifically? For the hiring process. I knew within the first 30 seconds of your appointment that you were an Omega. I could have addressed it directly rather than making you manage the uncertainty of whether I would rescind the offer. He looked at the garden wall. That was not fair to you. I stared at his profile for a moment. Are you apologizing for making me anxious during a job interview? I'm apologizing for the power imbalance in that moment. You had prepared an answer and I let you deploy it when I already knew the truth. It was unnecessary. Internal thought, Yoon Siwon, Pac Alpha, built an entire fortress around his grief. Runs his estate like a precision instrument, smells like cedar and cold rain, and is currently sitting on a garden bench apologizing for a micro-inequity in a hiring conversation because he decided it was the right thing to do. I was going to need significantly stronger blockers. Apology received, I said. For what it's worth, I would have given the same answer even if I'd known you already knew. I know, he said. That's part of why I hired you. The maple above us released another handful of leaves. They came down slow and red through the cold air. One landed on the bench between us. Neither of us moved it. The Shin Pack, I said. He'll come back. Yes. With documentation this time, probably. He'll make it formal so you can't dismiss it as personal. Yes. Do you want me to build a counterfile? Everything that undermines the boundary claim. Historical records. Any correspondence from the original negotiation that predates Miho's death. Current territorial usage evidence. I turned to look at him directly. I'm very good at building cases. He turned to look at me at the same moment. Our eyes met at a distance that was closer than the briefing table and further than the doorframe and exactly the distance at which pretending became genuinely impossible. Why are you still here, Noh Jiho? He said. Not unkindly, like the question had been building for days and had finally found its way out. I considered the honest answer for 3 seconds. Because the job is interesting, I said. And because leaving now would mean Shin Woo-kyung wins something. And I do not like that man. The corner of Siwon's mouth moved. Held. Did not correct itself this time. Build the counterfile, he said. Already planning it. We sat for another minute in the cold bright garden with the red leaves and the quiet and the cedar settled warm around me like it had stopped asking permission. Then Siwon stood. The briefing. 1 hour, I said. You said 1 hour. We have 18 minutes. He paused. Looked down at me on the bench. You timed it. I time everything. It's how I stay functional. He made a sound. Low and quiet and almost a laugh. He walked back toward the building. I sat for 30 more seconds with the maple leaf still on the bench between where we had both been, the cedar warm in the air around me, and the specific devastating clarity of a person who has just made a choice they did not consciously decide to make but whose body had already committed to completely. Internal thought. I am going to build the best counterfile this city has ever seen. And then I am going to have a very serious conversation with my cardiovascular system about professional boundaries. In that order. I stood up, straightened my jacket, walked back inside. The cedar came with me. The counterfile took 4 days to build. 4 days of pulling historical records from the estate's archive room, cross-referencing territorial boundary maps against Seattle's county documentation, locating every piece of correspondence from the original Shinyun negotiation that existed in physical or digital form. Baek Juno helped without being asked, appearing at my office door on the second day with 2 boxes of folders and the expression of someone who had been waiting years for a person to finally do this job. Haewon provided 3 years of external business records that established consistent Yoon Pack territorial usage along the disputed boundary. Jaehan pulled security rotation logs that documented physical presence across every contested coordinate going back to before Kang Miho died. I built the file like I was building a wall. Internal thought. Every page I added was a message to Shin Woo-kyung. A quiet, thoroughly documented, legally unassailable message that said, "This pack has someone paying attention now. Try it." Siwon reviewed the completed file on a Tuesday morning after the briefing, sitting across from me at the long table while I walked him through the structure section by section. He asked 3 precise questions. I had anticipated 2 of them. The third one caught me genuinely off guard, and I told him so, adjusted the relevant section on the spot, and watched him read the revision with the focused attention that I had stopped finding unnerving somewhere around day 6 and started finding something else entirely. When he finished, he set the file down and looked at me. "This is thorough," he said. "It's complete. There's a difference. Thorough implies I might have missed something." The almost laugh again. Warmer this time. Less almost. Internal thought. I was collecting those. Every fractional smile. Every low quiet sound that lived next door to a laugh. I was keeping all of them in the part of me that had stopped pretending it was not doing exactly that. "Send a copy to the PAC's legal team," he said, "and one to Shin Woo-kyung's office." I looked up. Preemptively. Let him know the conversation he wants to have is already answered before he starts it. He stood. It's what Miho would have called a clean move. He said it evenly. No fracture in the voice. No careful management around the name. Just Miho, spoken the way you speak the name of someone you have finally found a way to carry without being crushed by the weight of them. I watched him walk to the window and felt something shift in the room's atmosphere the way barometric pressure shifts before weather changes. "Siwon," I said. He turned. "I'm not going to pretend the last 2 weeks have been purely professional. For me." I held his gaze across the table. Clean and direct and terrifying. "I'm not going to perform ignorance about what's been building in this building since the doorframe in the rain. That would be dishonest, and I don't do dishonest." I kept my voice steady through what felt like dismantling myself in front of a person I genuinely respected. "But I also work for you, and that matters to me. So I'm telling you clearly, once, and then I will absolutely follow whatever boundary you need to set." The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the Seattle morning was doing something rare and specific. Actual sunlight. Not the apologetic filtered kind, but real direct gold light falling across the front grounds and turning the stone path into something that looked like it belonged in a different story than the gray one we had been living in. Siwon looked at me for a long moment. "When I hired you," he said, "Baek Juno asked me afterward if I understood what I was doing. Bringing an Omega into this estate. Into this specific dynamic." He paused. "I told him I hired you because your file was the strongest I had reviewed in 2 years. That was true." Another pause, and something in his expression moved through its final layer of defense and did not come back. "It was not the complete truth." My heartbeat counted itself. "The scent," he said quietly. "In the interview. Through the blockers. Warmth." He looked at his hands briefly and then back at me. I hadn't recognized a scent as anything other than a professional variable in 8 years. "And in 30 seconds of you standing in my office not apologizing for anything, I recognized yours as something I wanted to be near." His jaw tightened and released. "That frightened me considerably. I hired you anyway." Internal thought. Yoon Siwon, who built a fortress around a wound. Who controlled everything because once he had trusted and the cost had been unsurvivable. Who just stood at a window in actual sunlight and told me the truth at the same cost it had taken me to tell him mine. I stood up, walked around the table, stopped in front of him at doorframe distance. Close enough that the cedar was everywhere and my heartbeat had completely abandoned the pretense of professionalism, and I did not care even slightly. "I'm going to need a clear answer," I said. "Because I am not the kind of person who reads into things, and I am not going to misread this." Jiho, my name in his voice. No title. Just the 2 syllables. Direct and quiet and warmer than I had ever heard anything from him. "I am not good at this. I should tell you that honestly. 8 years of not being good at it. I will get things wrong. I will default to control when I should default to communication. I will sometimes need to be reminded that trust is not the same as weakness." "I know," I said. "I watched you review my audit findings at 7 a.m. for a week. I have a complete picture of your communication style." His mouth curved. Full this time. A real smile, unhurried and unguarded. and it rearranged his entire face into something that made my chest ache with the specific sweetness of seeing a person arrive back at something they thought they had permanently lost. "You are going to be very difficult," he said. "I prefer thorough," I said. "There's a difference." He reached up and set his hand against the side of my face. "Careful. Asking without asking." His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone once, and the cedar scent wrapped around me like something that had been waiting for permission and was finally, completely, allowed. I leaned into it. Not dramatically. Not with any of the grand gestures that stories usually required at their endings. Just a small, true movement toward warmth. My forehead tipping forward until it rested against his shoulder. His arm coming around me with the careful deliberateness of someone learning to hold something again after a long time of holding nothing. We stood like that in the sunlit briefing room while the counterfile sat completed on the table, and the cedar settled into my bones like it had always known the address. Internal thought. My mother said omegas carry warmth the way rivers carry rain. Eventually everything flows where it needs to go. I used to think that was just something she said to feel better. Standing here, I think she was right. I think she was right the whole time. Jaehyun's voice came from the corridor outside. Loud and cheerful and entirely too close. "Haewon, I told you something was happening in there. Pay up." Haewon's voice, closer than expected. "I said 2 weeks. Hasn't been 2 weeks. The bet is still active. They're clearly having a moment right now. The bet is resolved. The terms were 2 weeks. Haewon. Jaehyun." Siwon exhaled against my hair. One slow breath that carried the last of something heavy and old. "They have been doing this their entire lives," he said quietly. "I apologize in advance." "Don't," I said. "I like them." His arm tightened once. Brief and certain. Outside in the corridor, the argument about the bet continued with escalating specificity. The sunlight held across the stone path. The maple in the east garden stood red and still against the bright morning. I stayed exactly where I was. Not because I had nowhere else to be. Because for the first time since I walked through those iron gates in the rain with one duffel bag and the nerve of someone with nothing left to lose, exactly where I was felt like precisely where I was supposed to be. The warmth in the room was cedar and sunlight and something that did not have a designation or a classification or a name in any professional framework I had ever learned. I had stopped needing it to. Internal thought. Job 1. Survive the first week. Done. Job 2. Professional. Ongoing negotiation. Job 3. Prove the point. Proved. Job 4. Learn the scent geography. Learned it. Memorized it. Let it memorize me back. He smelled like home. I had stopped hating him for it. Like, comment, subscribe and click on the notification bell. Thanks for watching.